Where do I even begin with this one? Some of you might think that over time I have developed a bias towards Wilder, and I'd be lying if I denied that I haven't in the slightest. In fact, in the past when I reached Depth 5 for the first time, I was headstrong into thinking that Wilder was actually one of the worst characters in the game, simply because there's not one aspect in that he specializes. He doesn't do the most damage, and neither does he have the most health. Because of this, my philosophy of the game at the time forced me to play other characters. But as much as I didn't like playing Wilder, it only took me one moment to look at my results and realize that he has by far the highest win rate out of the other characters I've played. To record the data, I simply just scrolled through a bunch of games on the visual codex, recording the character I played and whether or not I did win for each session. Only Depth 5 games. To my surprise, Wilder had the highest win rate by a landslide. This went against everything I understood about Nightreign and led me to believe that there was actually some truth to this. Theoretically, he shouldn't be performing well, so why is he? I did some playing around and lots of testing until I figured out what it was. Once I got my thumb on it, I made a build and suddenly I'd go multiple games in Depth 5 on end without going down a single time. The viewers that have played with me can verify this. It was so good that I used to routinely hop from Discord, grab 2 randoms and just casually carry them to max regardless of their skill level with this one single build. By next week, they've already reached the max and would drop all the way down to Depth 3 because they hate it in Depth 5. I did say in a recent post that this episode of the Build Codex was going to be different in that I'm not actually going to do any live runs. For today, I'm going to just go over what it is, why it works, how it works, and how to play it. For the future episodes, the how to play part would be absent and will be replaced by a report of the discoveries I've made in testing a build's practicality. It's about time I told you what the build is for this episode. It's Fists Wilder. For all the episodes, I've just been showing really strong versions of the build concepts I've showcased, and from this, some of you have reached out to me to suggest showing what a minimum setup should look like. For the normal relics, art spreads in a fire and night invaders are mandatory. This build appreciates Hoarfrost Stomp and the Great Sword follow-up. Since this is a melee build, HP restoration upon fist attacks is also appreciated. Dormant Power Fists is also mandatory to have for our setup, but it can be found on both normal and the Deep of Night relics. Speaking of the Deep of Night relics, character skill inflicts blood loss, 1 increased max HP, defeating enemies for the art gauge +1 and at least 1 physical attack up +4 is mandatory. Of course, if you can, you should stack physical attack up +4. Uplifting is also nice to have for dire moments. Just having 1 increased max HP puts us above 1200 max base HP, which is already enough for us. If you want a more detailed explanation on deciding how much HP your build should have, I suggest checking out the build crafting guide I have linked in the description. As an example for a minimum build setup, you should have something that looks like this. Looking at this carefully, you can see that we've ticked all the boxes. So as long as you stick to the right foundation, you can branch out the build into whatever you'd like. For me personally, I like to have the Red Balancer relic on and then combine it with Hoarfrost and the Great Sword follow-up. Now that you know what the build is and how to build it, we need to talk about why it works. Starting off with explaining Fists and why they are so amazing. Let's begin by talking about the moveset. Arguably the best moveset in the game. The heavy attack comes out so quickly for how much stance damage it does, and the light attacks are good for sneaking in extra hits without consuming much stamina. Part of the reason why Fists work really well comes from the fact that they synergize with the 2 most broken damage negation passives in the game, those being Successive and Charged attacks. The charge attack on Fists come out very quickly and do loads of stance damage, so you'd actually want to be using charge attacks when possible. And to proc Successive, all you need to do is connect 2 uncharged heavies. This still works stacked with another passive requiring successive attacks, but the number of uncharged heavies required increases to 3 when you have 3 passives or items requiring successive attacks. So for your games, you're mainly looking for just 2. First will just be damage negation, and the other could be boosted attack power from either the glass necklace or wing sword insignia, or HP restoration via the godskin cloth or the dormant power. From the previous episode, I've received comments of players telling me that stance breaking isn't as viable or not something to think about in trios, and that is not true. I'd say it's more dependent on your team composition. If you're playing Fists Wilder and you get paired with an Executor or Guardian who do guard counters, or a Raider or Undertaker who do charged attacks, you're going to be stance breaking a lot, especially on the bigger enemies. Like I was once in a game with a Guardian and a Raider against Everdar Gaping Jaw on depth 5, and we staggered him 11 times in that fight. It was incredible. This is only if I have other melee builds on the team. How does this build perform when I'm on a team where I'm the only melee build? What if I told you that this build is actually the best in its self-preservation? Now, I know what you're thinking. There's Tank Guardian. As surprising as it sounds, HP does not simply equate to survivability. There's more that goes into surviving. I've played with one Guardian player who mainly plays Tank Guardian, and he has over a 200 game win streak. You may know him as Nah I Block from Puff Dragon's videos. He told me that the closest that he's ever come to losing a game was to Everdart Caligo. Let's imagine that I was in a fight with Everdart Caligo myself in depth 5, who still has 80% of her health left with both my teammates 3-barred on the ground. This has happened to me before when I was carrying Discord randoms back in the day. Now they're my friends. If I was playing Fists Wilder, in which I was, I can confidently say that I'm able to bring Caligo's health down all the way to 0, all by myself, in which I did while dropping the Wending Grace in the middle of the fight. If you want to know how to do that, I have my Everdart Caligo guide down in the description if you want to check it out. I don't think I'd be as confident with Tank Guardian because let's be real here. If your teammates are on 3 bars with most of the boss's health left, they're practically useless unless needed for distraction. My point is that aggression is sometimes needed for survivability, and the way it is needed is in your ult cycles. It's not just Caligo's crystals. After cancelling, I can get my ultimate back before the dog split again. I can get it back before the next tornado. I can get it back before the next laser cannon. I can get it back before the next sleeping event. I can get it back before the next set of borders, given that I have defeating enemies fill the art gauge +1 and in trios. I can get it back before the next twin blade combo, and I can get it back before Huel Store's next set of spirits. There's actually a few things that contribute to this. First off, Wilder's uncharged ultimate preserves 30% of its gauge after using it. Secondly, part of the reason you're able to proc successive attacks super fast with fists is because one uncharged heavy counts as 2 attacks instead of 1, because the game accounts for 2 balls hitting the enemy, not 1. What this means is that you're also charging your ultimate back twice as fast with each uncharged heavy as opposed to two-handing a weapon. Well, can't we say the same applies to power stancing twin blades and curved swords? Yes, we can, but the charge attacks aren't as great. Another thing is that with fists, we don't have to do 2 uncharged heavies in succession. We can space them out and still proc successive, which gives us more agility and flexibility in our play. So yeah, my point earlier, how do 2 DPS ranged builds fare playing with the build that has arguably the best self-preservation in the game? I'd say pretty well. You could argue that you also need support. Now, I'd go as far to argue that this build provides the best support in game, in tandem with Food Buffer Scholar. I say in tandem because Fists Wilder provides the best support in a different area to Scholar. There are ultimates apart from Wilders that can cancel really dangerous attacks, but because Wilders comes out very quickly, I can cancel the ones that come out really quickly too. Examples include Deathrite Bird's Raining Spears and Blackblade Kindred's Whirling Tornado, Animus's Orbital Laser Cannon when it's on standby and not coming out of the pest's body, and Libra's Borders. Undertaker can do the same thing, but the other reason why this build provides the best support is also how reliably and consistently it can revive teammates from 3 bars. All you need is 1 grapple or 2 uncharged heavies from fists, and your ultimate with the fire. Both the uncharged and charged versions do the same revive damage. I believe I made my point earlier on how fast Fist Wilder can charge his ultimate back. Instead of savoring its cycle in the fight, you will have the option of reviving your down teammates too. This is actually the reason why I said it's mandatory to have Art Spread in a fire. It's so good, it's pretty much essential. There's also Halo Scythe Duchess that should be addressed. With all the skilled Duchesses out there, what are you without it? I was playing with a viewer on Dev 2 one time and they were relying me as the Wilder for damage when they're playing skilled Duchess. It was so funny to think about. This begs the question, what is Fist's Wilder without Fists? We are greatswords, and it's part of the reason why I said that this build appreciates having the follow-up. Because what if we don't get Fists? The damage output is to not be slept on, because outside of them having great scaling, the follow-up does similar damage to a charged heavy, and our greatsword is on fire 90% of the time. And I say output because part of the reason I believe greatswords are so effective in their damage is because of Wilder's unique moveset. The light attacks come out much faster and do as much revive damage as an uncharged heavy from fists. We already know Hoarfrost is great for getting rid of invaders and pests. We can reset the frost whenever we want. For example, there could be a red Royal Revenant in Castle Basement and we know it's weak to status ailments, so while we're still short on loot, we want to focus on getting rid of the Revenant as fast as possible. On top of Frost, there's also blood loss from our grapple. I cannot emphasize how essential it is to have this because in the early game, this allows you to one-shot bats, dogs, and Misbegotten. Even if it doesn't, all the enemies that are pulled towards you by the grapple can be true comboed into the follow-up. I almost forgot to mention, the support that our ultimate brings to the team doesn't go away. It's still there for reviving and canceling. I've been preaching about how effective Fist's Wilder is, but I usually get a response that goes along the lines of, it does decent damage. Okay, we could be doing more with other characters and other builds, but what are we getting in return for leaving damage on the table? Well, you can tell me. Oh wait. We also got 6th Sense if this wasn't enough already. So now that you know that this build is good, how do you actually play it? What should you be prioritizing? What should you be looking for? What you should be keeping an eye out for from the get-go is one of the blue fists. That's either Star Fist or Iron Bolt, not Spiked Ceaseless. If at any point in the run you're at, let's say, level 10 and you still don't have your hands on any fist weapons, you could do any of the POIs that offer blue dormant powers. That's pretty much all of Castle, the forts, the ruins, the encampments, and the small field bosses. When it comes to passives, I'd say you should be keeping at least 1 of 3 on you. Successive attacks boost damage negation at full, and damage negation upon charged attacks. How much you prioritize one over the other should be dependent on the night bosses and the Night Lord you'll be up against. For example, in this run we are up against Everdark Libra, so finding less likely is going to be one of our top priorities. If we were to replace one of the 3 damage negation passives, what would it be? If I was playing with a Duchess, I'd imagine that one of the Duchess invaders could be the one with the Ice Crest shield and the Frozen Needle. Against this invader, I'd be spamming nothing but charge attacks because she can't parry them. The same goes against the Guardian with the Commander Standard, except he doesn't go for any parries. I'm with a Wilder and a Scholar, so I was thinking to myself that I'm not going to be needing charge attacks as much as I'd be needing Successive. There are also cases where you'd want charge attacks over Successive. One example is against the Moog. If you walk into Bloodflame, that immediately takes away your Successive. Whereas for charge attacks, I keep the damage negation for the rest of the 10 seconds I have with it. You may be wondering what the other two passives should be, since we're already occupying 3 slots for damage negation and 1 slot for the fists themselves. The two can be anything from more damage negation, less likely for Everdark Libra, and offensive passives. When it comes to offense, you should just be looking for what provides the biggest boost: melee attack power, wielding 2 armaments, and attack at full. What you'll notice is that this build's playstyle isn't exactly like Raider. It's more bait and punish, where you quickly go in for an attack and then you back out just as quickly. And this attack window is enough to get your damage negation passives off just before the boss switches aggro onto you. The reason I like to keep the red balance relic is because of the occasional nullifying, and the reason I believe that it has been able to save my life countless times is because losing successive or damage at full counts as damage negation being lowered. When the 10-second timer on charge attack subsides, this counts as damage negation lowered too. And if there is none that can save you, which is very rare but can still happen, there is your sixth sense that acts as sort of a wake-up call that you need to lock in. As good as the moveset is on Fist, how do you use them against invaders? Typically against those with great shields, all of those invaders like Marauder Wilder, Prelate Raider, and Fingerprint Guardian fall victim to bait and punish. Those without shields fall victim to the grapple. If you didn't know, the grapple, if it stuns the invader, true combos into the uncharged heavy of Fists. Sometimes the grapple can knock an invader down out of the air if they decide to jump, and every time they do get knocked down, that's a free charge attack on their getup. Finally, those who have small shields fall victim to charge attacks, and because we're using fists, breaking their guard is pretty easy, especially when used in tandem with the grapple. All techniques mentioned are covered in the Everdark Libra guide, where I also go over countermeasures for all 30 different invaders. When it comes to Everdark balances though, you may think that the damage is extremely important in trios because of the possibility that 2 balances may jump the same player. There is a countermeasure to this that I didn't know before. I learned about this from a recent video by Truck, where this creator goes over how the AI works. Essentially, the strategy is that if you are not the first one targeted from the first balancer out of a 1 phase or straight into the Everdark phase, you need to stay closer to the pack of balancers than your teammates and vice versa if you are the first one targeted. The reason is because the first balancer targets someone at random, and then the next 2 target players based on whoever is closest to them. So if the one targeted by the initial balancer is closest to the pack relative to their teammates, they're going to have another balancer jump them 2 at the same time while already being pursued. So for me, I like to just grab 1 balancer out of the pack and then deal with them on my own. This brings me to the one weakness that this build has, and I'm sure some of you have noticed it already. It's the same case with pretty much all bait and punish melee builds. It's that how well you perform strongly depends on how well versed you are in every enemy and boss's moveset. Like, the best strategy for Everdark balances, in my opinion, for this build is to grab 1 balancer out of the pack and 1v1 them far away from your teammates. I can't exactly tell the average player to do something like that. Same goes for Everdark Libra's invaders. I claim that this build trivializes every single invader from Everdark Libra's fight, but unless you've studied every single one of them, it's not going to be trivial because the strategy slightly differs a bit to encompass each one's nuances. As for a summary for the strengths, imagine this. Every build's effectiveness is directly proportional to the pilot's skill level. This build by far has the highest concept of proportionality K out of any build in this game. The last thing to go over when it comes to talking about how to play the build are the alternative weapons, especially the other fist weapons. If you weren't able to find Starfist or Iron Balls, you may be able to find either Clinging Bone or Veteran's Prosthesis. I think both of these purple fist weapons are severely underrated. Although you do miss out on the charge attack that the blue fists have, the dash attack on these two purple weapons are infinitely better. It's sort of a quick lunge forward, which are especially useful with the grapple because, as you know, when you attack straight after grappling an enemy, instead of doing the light attack, Wilder will decide to do the dash attack instead. The fact that the playstyle of this build revolves around swiftly entering and exiting combat, it actually fits our use case very well. And dash attacks are no joke. The white gives 20%. For reference, a purple 2 armaments gives 18%. Another weapon that you may come across quite often are the Raptor Talons. Even though claws aren't the dormant power we're running, there's still a good chance we can find them because they happen to be the only purple weapon in their class. Raptor Talons have a similar dash attack to Clinging Bone and Veteran's Prosthesis, but unlike those two, Raptor Talons has an amazing charge attack. You do, however, miss out on dealing strike damage, but I usually wouldn't worry too much about it. I've pretty much gone over everything that you need to know to get started. As I'm recording this, I'm not actually sure if there is still time left in the expedition being showcased, but if there is, you may enjoy the rest of the fight. This Evidoc Libra run, this was supposed to be Depth 5 trios, but we had a guy disconnect in the middle of the expedition. This fight was actually never supposed to be a part of the video. I only recorded it when I already had most of this video edited. But the fact that I have this footage and I was playing Fists Wilder, I was just thinking to myself, might as well include it so you can gauge just how powerful this build can be. If you're wondering why I don't have the additional character skill use, is because I just replaced the Wildest Earring with the Shop Relic. This was also the case for the expedition shown earlier. At the end of the fight, I'll show you the weapons and passives I had for this fight specifically. Enjoy the rest of the video.